1968, as we all know, gifted us with this planetary culture. And one of the things it did was bring Asian spiritual traditions into the West. So, after 50 years, in 1968 revisited, I think we should ask the very important question, what does Asia still have to teach us? By way of introduction, I am Bindu. I am from Oroville. And just to say a bit about myself and to give you a sense of where I'll be leading the panel as a moderator, I recently shared with a small gathering that my spiritual life and practice has never been divorced from my concerns for environmental and social justice. And the way we will go about this panel is, I will introduce the panelists and actually given them some questions to already ponder. So let me just start by reading out what the topics that the panelists would be presenting on. We will first have Rita Sharma. She will be speaking on sustaining societies, restoring nature. Then Debashish, if we could follow up with you to speak on the faiths of Indian spirituality. And lastly, we will have Clark Shu, Ancient Eyes, New Landscape, a talk of the gifts of Chinese tradition and Tibetan Buddhism in psycho-spiritual development and application. To introduce Rita Sharma briefly, Rita is the Director and Associate Professor at Graduate Theological Union, Meera and Ajay Shingle Center for Dharma Studies. She is also the co-chair of Sustainability 360 Degrees and is a co-doctoral faculty at the Graduate Theological Union associated with the University of Berkeley. She has been the Swami Vivekananda Visiting Professor in Hindu Studies at USC, Los Angeles. And she's the author of numerous books on Hinduism and on sustainable societies. So with that, I turn to Rita to speak on sustaining societies, restoring nature. 20 minutes, please.
I want to thank Dr. Banerji and CIIS for this wonderful conference, and thank all of you for being here. I will speak fast so that I have time to hear your questions. Thus far, the search for solutions to the unparalleled planetary climate change, in addition to decades of degradation of wilderness, ecosystems, and habitats, has been primarily data-driven, in spite of decades of evidence that purely data-driven efforts are often inadequate for engendering massive transformations in human thought and action. In the Anthropocene, it can be argued that the sustainable nature requires sustainable societies. The devastation of the ecosphere is inextricably linked to histories of unsustainable commercial, societal, geopolitical, racial, and cultural relationships. To enable the restoration and flourishing of the ecosystems of the biosphere, human societies need to be reimagined and reordered towards human well-being and care for the commons. The epistemic frameworks that have led to climate change and the ravaging of the earth are not likely, in and of themselves, to lead to the healing of the same. In other words, we can't just look to STEM and say we're saved. As such, ways of knowing, valuing, experiencing, and caring that are ensconced in religion, culture, and tradition are essential resources, we believe, for the human transformation necessary to achieve social and environmental regeneration and renewal. The challenges are significant enough to warrant the creation of pedagogy that will be deeply integrative with the whole interreligious platform. I'm currently collaborating on the development of a program that will initiate a new academic area that of interreligious sustainability studies. This program takes as a starting point the fact that religions have been interested in and engaged with the welfare of individuals, communities, and the natural world far, far longer than other systems of human thought and action, which are relatively new and recent. Historically, religions have always been a great force, a profound force for individual transformation and communitarian action. Those actions have not always been positive, as we well know, but the potential is certainly there. Increasingly, contemporary theologians and scholars of religion have offered exegesis and constructions that articulate the positive impact of religions in conceptualizing the greater good. And religious groups have worked to develop forward-leaning initiatives that support the well-being of communities. Over the past several years, there has been a growing awareness of the need to incorporate these resources of religion and theology into the academic and public discourse on long-term solutions to the complex of problems that now face humanity and the biosphere. In distinction to religion and ecology, the initiative that we're working on will initiate a much wider discussion related to sustainability studies, which is a conceptual framework that views human activities as forceful enough to alter historically stable features of the Earth's biogeophysical systems. There are many programs in sustainability studies, but few such programs fully incorporate the humanities. And many of them are considered essentially greenwashing. Our research indicates that there are no such programs in sustainability that integrate religions or the significant ethical, moral, aesthetic, contemplative, communitarian, organizational, and other transformative resources of religions, nor do they encompass the wide-ranging global initiatives on sustainability that have been sponsored by religious groups. It would, therefore, initiate a field of inquiry specializing in the integration of religion and spirituality, a major dimension of human life, into the search for paths to a sustainable future. To be sure, as a significant body of critical studies have shown, the power of religion has not always been deployed towards human flourishing or care for the natural world. Sometimes it has contributed to destruction and carnage and ethnic cleansing and genocide. Yet, the power exists to move, heal, and inspire individuals and communities, and can be utilized and are being utilized to encourage the pursuit of the common good. When religion is perceived as an open system, an open ecosystem, we begin to understand that it is supported and nourished by feedback loops that move and transform information, one, amongst different religions, two, between religion and the rest of society, and three, from the natural world into religious culture. The acknowledgement of this mutual enrichment between religion and other areas and disciplines and sources of knowledge challenges the closed system approach, which tends to create brittle and violently defended barriers. An open system approach not only allows for respectable and respectful and non-defensive dialogue, it points to the possibility of a teleology where both human and natural flourishing are recognized as increasingly interdependent, interrelated, on the acknowledgement of the widespread mutual conditioning of the past and the ever tighter interdependence of the future. There are significant resources within the tradition that is my heritage and also my academic discipline, that is the Hindu tradition, that deeply support and enact the view of religion as an open, interconnected system which needs to be identified and reclaimed. The challenge for Hindu thought and practice lies in, one, positing a religious identity no matter how fluid and porous, and two, envisioning a faith still embedded in geography to a faith that is meaningful to a global civilization where culture and ethnicity can no longer be the glue that holds a spiritual world together. And number 3, rejecting customs of inherited injustice while theologically asserting their irrelevance to Hindu first principles such as ahimsa, non-harming. In the preamble to Pope Francis's encyclical on ecological action for the amelioration of the condition of the earth, he writes, "This sister, the earth, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts is also reflected in the systems of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. She groans in travail. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, we receive life and refreshment from her waters." Such words speak deeply into the Hindu sensibility, honed by nearly 5,000 years of communion with the natural world, considered not as a lower realm over which humans have been given dominion, but the physical manifestation of the divine, metaphorically the body of God. Her elements are evoked in prayer and worship over and over again. They are acknowledged to be the material of our embodiment and the ligament that connects us to the rest of nature. We think of her not as sister, but as mother. And early Vedic hymns express pain at the very thought of tilling the soil and forcing a weapon to the heart of our mother. Conceptual resources for ecology in Hindu thought and practice abound, from the foundational principles of philosophical concept of Brahman, the all-pervasive ultimate reality of the Upanishads, that evinces what I have referred to elsewhere as radical divine eminence, which is the title of my forthcoming book, to the common practice of marriage performed for trees, sacred groves, the inclusion of animals in sacred literature, ancient ascetic observances that leave almost no footprint upon the earth, and diverse pious observances for the remembrance of the preciousness of land, waterways, mountains, forests, and living creatures. The question that comes to mind in view of the rich ecological resources inherent in Hindu thought and praxis is, why is India such a natural disaster? First, India is a rigidly secular industrial nation where the ancient thought systems and traditions of our past have been nearly swept into the dustbin of history. Second, historically, centuries of European colonization and decades of cultural and intellectual domination by monocultures of the mind created by hegemonic thought, Western hegemonic thought, have removed most traces of reverence for the ecological wisdom embedded in the scriptures of the ancient Vedic peoples. Were these principles and practices do exist, are in remote places and in rural areas, not in the corridors of power where intellectual, economic, or political might rules and wishes to join with the monoculture of the market. The search for material prosperity and the uncritical race towards highest technological knowledge has great cachet in the emerging nations that feel the desperate need to catch up to the West in economic terms. My theological perspective, my personal theological perspective, influences the way I look at relationships, whether personal or professional, and it very strongly influences my relationship with the planet, the biosphere and its ecosystems. My theological perspective is based on the theology of the Mahadevi, known in Shakta Bhakti as God the Mother. The reason that this is very important to me and to many Hindu women is that there is a profoundly immanental aspect, that is, divine presence as pervasive within the very elements of the world, aspect of this theology which impacts my ethics, my morality, my relationships, and daily life. This aspect tells me that the Divine Mother transforms herself into the universe, the sacred, both transcendent but also radically immanent. She imbues both energy and matter. She creates space-time, and she is the chit, or energetic tendency, towards emergence and consciousness that infuses energy matter within space-time. Everything is permeated by divine presence, which means that sanctity is not something we reserve for certain individuals, but every plant, every tree, every animal, and the earth itself, the very dust of the cosmos itself, is an expression of her creative function, and therefore it requires my care, my thought, my love. That compassion also transfers to my relationship to other people, because with the theology of the Mahadevi in its final consummation, our ultimate self is the one self. I cannot have charity for the other because the other is myself. We are called by the spiritual tradition to surrender to her, to offer one's knowing, feeling, sensing self on a moment-by-moment basis in the now to that higher power. That is our offering. That is my worship. The results are not mine. It belongs to the Divine Mother. We act out of love, prema, that reflects her care and concern for her creation, but we cannot be attached to the results. As the Gita advises, do not be attached to the fruits of your action. And what it suggests is the futility of such attachments, because the domain of the fruits of one's actions is beyond one's control. We have no power over it, and as such, there is no point in being attached. And this is very important for activists such as myself, because frustration is the fruit of attachment. What we do have power over is our actions and our attitudes. So we are encouraged to act, but to act in alignment with the conviction in a divine presence in all beings, with the faith that the higher power is moving us continually towards the higher level of consciousness and awareness, even when it is not apparent to us. So, moment to moment, day by day, that is my only effort. Everything I try to achieve is because I believe it is benevolent and beneficial according to this theology. The results of my action, therefore, I surrender continually. I surrender them to her. Now, in the Hindu thought systems, there's the process of ritual. In fact, most Hindus, if you ask them, what do you believe, they'll stare at you and say, I don't think that's an appropriate question. But if you say, what do you do? They'll say, oh, do you have 15 hours? Let me show you. So the process of ritual, which is very intrinsic to the entire Hindu spiritual world, served to create space for the envisioning of the elemental powers in divinized form. It provides the necessary environment in which to offer recognition, homage, and gratitude to the powers of nature through the offering of things of value, sacrifice. And 3, the avocation of an inner conviction that the revivification and supplication of the divine forces will indeed bring forth blessings and plenitude for the community and the world. The Vedas exalt the wonders of nature and regard the earth, Prithvi, and the major rivers as the divine feminine. In the Atharva Veda, the earth is eulogized as a lavish bestower of wealth, but she is also the mother who deserves our respect and protection. I quote, "The earth is the mother and I the son of the earth," Atharva Veda 12:12. Another passage reflects a deep concern for her well-being and a sense of responsibility for her care and preservation. "Oh, what have I done, O earth? I did out of thee, quickly may that grow again. May I not, O pure one, pierce thy vital spot, not thy heart." 12:35. The sentiment is echoed again in the following passage, which expresses a recognition of Earth's bounty as well as an assurance of protection from harm due to human settlement. "The snowy mountain heights, thy forests pure, O earth shall be kind to us. The brown, the black, the red, the multicolored soils of the firm earth that is protected by Indra, I have settled upon, but not suppressed, not slain, not wounded." plants and trees were also experienced as particularly animated by the power of divine presence. And they were used for medicinal ritual as well as spiritual purposes. I want to leave with this thought, that we do not blame science, chemistry, biochemistry, technology for the disaster that is the Anthropocene. We do not blame chemistry for the plastic islands in the Pacific. We do not blame technology for the desecration of our democracy. But we blame religion for all of the above. Why don't we blame the sciences? Because we are very well aware of the benefits of science on a day-to-day basis. We live longer. Our longevity, our health, our very presence, our very ability to communicate with each other is based upon science's achievements. But we forget, and we forget at our peril, that religion brought us everything from art to mathematics to architecture to music to medicine to drama to aesthetics to ethics to compassion. We must not forget that. We must not forget the power of the spiritual, which has been the most vibrant force to ever transform humanity in our history. We must not forget to include that as we move towards a sustainable future. Thank you.
Turn it on.
Thank you, Rita. So as I said, I would like to take a couple of questions and comments on Rita's ideas, and I would like to give the first chance to the panel members if they want to say something. Yeah?
That was a very impassioned appeal to include the power of spirituality in our concerns about sustainability. And I think that's an extremely necessary move, or switch from our ordinary way of thinking in our times. But you also went back, you talked about the Hindu approach to the earth as a spiritual presence. But earlier, before that, you started off by talking about what we need to do to sort of divest some of the evils that have entered into religion. Would you elaborate a little bit more about that with regard to Hinduism, when we see its practices and understand it in terms of a transformed use in our times?
Yes. So when we look at Catholicism, we cannot just see the genocide of the Americas. We cannot just see abusive priests. We cannot just see the Inquisition. We also have to see St. Teresa of Avila and Meister Eckhart and the entire tradition. And the encyclical Laudato Si. We have to see the entirety of the tradition, and we have to tease out and pull out those strands, those practices, those spiritual thought systems, philosophies and theologies that directly and indirectly can form a foundation from which to spring forward into a new tomorrow. And that work is critical, but it's also constructive. And what we are missing in the Hindu world, and I am immersed in it because of my long work with Buddhist and Christian colleagues who are involved in constructive philosophy and constructive theology, respectively, is the same in the Hindu world. It is simply missing, and there is a handful of scholars who are trying to move the tradition in this direction, because the way Hinduism is studied, and the ism bothers me a lot, Hindu Dharma is studied, is that it is an artifact frozen in time. And whereas other traditions are living streams of force and spirit, well, it is not an artifact frozen in time. And there is plenty of action going on within the Hindu world from spiritual sources towards sustainable goals. But if you ask them, what are you based on? What doctrines do you base it on? They will have a difficult time telling you. And the problem with that is that you then have a project and you have practices, but you don't have a stream of thought to pass on. And that I cannot negate the incredible importance of systematic thought.
I wanted to give the audience a chance to speak, but I have a burning question, so if I could go first. Rita, in the spirit of this conference, I am going to move us out from the pedagogical space to the actual social political space. And this is because I live in India, and to be honest, I'm dismayed at what's happening in the country right now. We have a fundamentalist Hindu party, and consumption of beef has been prohibited in many parts of the country. People are actually lynched on the real or false accusation of killing a cow. So what I'm seeing here, and also the last thing to mention is, Hindu fundamentalism has driven the Islamic fundamentalism in India. India is the second most populous country in the world for Muslims, and they were tolerant Muslims. They are the ones who wanted to join India as a republic, as a democratic republic, rather than joining Pakistan as an Islamic state. And we are driving them towards fundamentalism. So Rita, in view of these pertinent facts, how do you reconcile what you're speaking, which I also acknowledge is very true, about the Hindu spiritual practices protecting nature?
Thank you for your question, and let me respond to that in a twofold manner. First of all, I want to say that I'm an ecofeminist, and ecofeminists, as in most critical theories, insist on claiming your situatedness. And my situatedness, my entire life, has been within the context of North America. So when I claim my right to speak as a Hindu theologian and as an acharya of my lineage, I claim that right as an American. And when I exercise my theological construction and my involvement with planetary communities, whether in Oslo, we're involved with the Ashoka project in India, we're involved with projects in China, Korea, through our sustainability initiative, Rachel Carson Center in Germany, and many, many projects in the United States and Canada. This worldwide connection that I do as co-chair of our sustainability initiative, I do it as a Hindu American. So, and you could say American Hindu. And so it's not that I disavow my heritage. I was born in India, but I cannot tell Indians how to live because of my situatedness, because I think that would be hegemonic of me. So I can only speak out of an American voice. That is my First Amendment right to practice my religion. The way I practice it is through my theology and through my activism. In fact, to be a minority religion, to be of a minority religion in the United States today, to walk the streets, and to be a visible minority and of a minority religion is an activist enactment. And I have experienced more attacks on racism in the last 1 year, in fact, only in the last 1 year, than I have in my entire lifetime of being a citizen of North America, particularly in the United States. And so I need to worry about my fellow Hindus in the diaspora. I need to worry about my neighbors, my Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Confucian neighbors. I need to worry about how to construct a Hindu life that we can lead here. And I wish India well, and I hope it gets its act together. But I feel it would be incredibly hegemonic of me to tell India how to conduct itself. And that's the job for individuals like yourself, and you have my full support. Yes?
You want to? Yeah. Okay. Last. Could you have a mic here, please? Oh, you wanted this?
So actually, Bindu, I wanted to respond to you because I grew up in India and I'm still Indian. I personally agree with Richa that in these cases, pedagogy is even more important because if, like any other religion, there's always a side which religion says, and there's always a fundamentalist side. And if we don't teach what religion is all about, the fundamentalists will teach what is the religion. And I understood and understand Hinduism, and I learned a lot from Debashish on that. It's a very tolerant religion. It has always been a tolerant religion. In fact, I would say it's not even a religion. It's more a philosophical thought. And in my family, like my grandparents were completely atheist, and all of us have we worship different gods. So we don't even have one God. When me, my parents, my sister, everybody has different gods. So it's not even what are we following is sometimes even not important, is what we feel our dedication towards. And we can just go and explore that dedication.
Can I respond to that very briefly? Very briefly, and that is that I think that what I'm trying to say is not that I don't care about India. I have family in India. I was born in India. Of course I care. What I'm trying to say is that especially in this moment in time, where minorities in the United States are at risk. We are at risk when we walk the streets, we're at risk when we drive, we're at risk in our own apartments, where a police officer can come in and shoot us because they felt like it. I think that this is a time for minorities to not culturally disenfranchise themselves from their American identity and to bring to bear their heritage through their lived American lenses and join the stream of American resistance. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Rita. And thank you, Deepak, for that perspective, because I think this panel is also about, or the question we should be exploring in this conference is, how can pedagogy slowly permeate and influence society and politics? With that, I turn next to Debashish, who probably doesn't need an introduction. But I'll just read a couple of lines from his article. So Debashish is serving here as the Haridas Chaudhary Professor of Indian Philosophy and Culture and Doshi Professor of Asian Art. He's also the program chair and head program chair of the East-West Psychology Department. Personally, he has been a friend and mentor for many years, and he's of course very well appreciated for his books on Indian art, Asian art, lectures, talks, and courses that he gives both on art and also on Shrodinger's philosophy. So Debashish on the fates of Indian spirituality.
Thank you, Bindu. So I was going to talk about the fates of Indian spirituality, particularly in the West, and its assimilation here. So in speaking about the entry of Indian spirituality in the West, I see three waves, each with its own legacies, the temporal, historical waves. The first one is early modernity, from the late 18th to the mid-19th century, which saw the birth of Indology in Germany. Now, as we know, this led to the search for Aryan roots, Aryan origins, with some disastrous effects. But it also led to transcendentalist ideas that can be traced from the German transcendentalists to the English Romantics and to the American transcendentalists. The second and more recent wave is from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, which actually coincides with the phase of what we may call Indian nationalism, and with its landmark event in the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1893, with the talks and travels of Vivekananda and others who brought Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain ideas to America. This phase has to be understood in the context of early Indian nationalism, and particularly what has been called the Bengal Renaissance. The Bengal Renaissance is a phase of cultural politics which led to state politics. We were talking about cultural politics and its braided nature with state politics, anti-colonial state politics. It forms the inception of a colonial national interchange which is with us even today. This is not something that has got over when we got freedom. We are still in the middle of this colonial national interchange. Thinkers of the Bengal Renaissance run the spectrum from internal reformation to anti-colonial resistance. Arising in Calcutta, the capital of British activities in India from 1772 to 1911, it saw the rise of an intellectual elite which versed itself in English and the values of the Enlightenment and made this the basis of their critique of modernity, while accepting some of its key tenets. The principal of these tenets that it accepted was the equality of all human beings. But instead of basing this in the human reason, as in the Enlightenment, it saw this equality in the transcendental monist idea of Brahman, which has become all things and resides fully and equally in each of them. Based on this, it sought for a spiritual redefinition of human identity and articulations of universal spirituality. The influence of Bengali spiritual thinkers writing in English during this period, such as Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and to some degree Swami Yogananda, who came to America in 1920, combined with the legacies of American transcendentalism, led to the varieties of modern perennialism, which is one of the principal strands of contemporary New Age thought. Among the most significant meetings of Vivekananda's visits to the US must be counted his encounters with William James. It may not be too far-fetched to think of these meetings as laying the seeds of modern academic consciousness studies and transpersonal psychology. The end of the Second World War saw the beginning of a post-colonial phase in India and a spiritual deflation in the West, leading to the last resurgence of this phase. The arrival of Haridas Chaudhuri to San Francisco and the founding of the American Academy of Asian Studies in 1950 can be seen as part of this phase. The birth of modern physical yoga in India can also be traced to this phase, to this nationalist phase. It is significant that the formators of this kind of yoga were all nationalists, invested in the idea of building a body of resistance as an aspect of anti-colonial biopolitics. From this we move to the third wave of entry of Indian spiritual thought, which is the period we are talking about, the 1960s. From the 1960s, with aggressive American involvement in Asian geopolitics, about which we heard a little bit just earlier, in the name of a global balance of power, the post-World War spiritual disillusionment deepened, leading to the phenomenon of a counterculture, which could be said to peak around 1968. The early phase of this saw the migration of the hippies to India. The hippies in India sought a return to the primitive, combined with the spiritual rhetoric of fraternity. A best-selling book titled Karma Kola, written by Geeta Mehta and published in 1979, captures well the effect of the incursion of hippies in India during this period. As the title suggests, it saw the close braiding of half-digested Indian spiritual ideas with corporate pop capitalism. It also suggests the formation of new subcultural languages. It's not a kind of, these are all ambiguous things, that it has two sides. The formation of new subcultural languages capable of voicing new lifestyles. The aftermath of this incursion saw the reciprocal entry of Indian gurus to the US. These new teachers multiplied the diversity of Indian teachings in a bewildering array of sects and cults. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi began traveling to the West from 1960. Sri Chinmoy moved to the US in 1964. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada came in 1965. Muktananda in 1970. These are only a few prominent names among many who gave birth to what has been called the modern guru industry. At the peak of this movement, both CIAS, the California Institute of Asian Studies, which was the original name of CIIS, and Auroville in India were founded. This post-colonial wave of Indian spirituality introduced new characteristics which sat uneasily or paradoxically with the values of post-enlightenment modernity and which are with us to this day. These may be enumerated as a set of aporias. An aporia, for those who don't know, is a kind of a paradox that arises out of the collision, a dead-ended collision of two worldviews. A, sectarian aporia. Each of these teachers became the center of a personality cult and a sectarian claimant participating in the politics of truth. Now, the politics of truth is not something new. It's something that has been going on in India for ages. Each group claims its own right, hegemonic right, as the truth. And people who enter it are usually not allowed to look outside because they're given their version of what it is. This challenges the modern tenet of pluralism and obscures a clear understanding of the total possibilities of spirituality. B, hierarchical aporia. Founded on a strong distinction between guru and disciple in terms of power and truth, this challenges the basic enlightenment tenet of the equality of all humans and succumbs frequently to the abuses of power. C, sexual aporia. Often celibate in their origins, or as in forms of tantra, using sex as a means to the transcendence of desire, yet operating in a countercultural environment of sexual freedom, the leaders of these sects often became the perpetrators of sexual abuse. D, materialist aporia. Transcendentalist and reclusive in their origins, yet operating in a materialistic environment, leaders of these sects often succumb to the lures of materialism. E, existential aporia. Once again, belonging to the peripheries of society, but now catering to the existential needs of a modern mainstream, these sects and their leaders often lacked the ethical and creative resources of life integration. F. Political aporia. Though, as we saw, modern Indian spirituality has been a bedfellow of politics from the nationalist period, while the politics of the Bengal Renaissance maintained a modernist pluralism, the new spiritual politics is increasingly ethnocentric, lending itself to the designs of ultra-right nationalism. Yet, new guru sects with even more of a personality cult orientation and even less of a teaching are in our midst today. On the other hand, the very use and meaning of the word yoga has been reduced to the burgeoning ends of the fitness industry. In conclusion, the futures of Indian spirituality, as represented by the wave of modern gurus starting from the 1960s, has floundered on the rocks of modernist ethics and jurisdiction. Among all these futures, beset by cultism, right-wing politics, and capitalism, the trajectories of Indian spirituality, if they are to fulfill the hopes invested in them by those who saw in them a positive contribution to the human or post-human future, must be recovered in settings which render them open to pluralist universal praxis. It is for this reason that I see the encounter of Vivekananda with William James as having an even greater significance for Indian spirituality than the latter's address at the Parliament of World Religions. The founding of CIIS, with its orientation towards a new kind of scholarship, marked by the dialogue of academics and spiritual practice, is a ray of hope in this direction. Scholar practitioners who can transform both academics and spirituality to the formation of new communities equally invested in both may open the way to the new sanghas of the post-human future. For this to flourish, the academic habitus must also change to one of lifelong learning and existential experimentation. Communities like Auroville may have something to teach us in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debashish. That was a very sobering analysis of the fates of Indian spirituality in USA. But also thank you for pointing to directions, giving us a hope of where we could be going with this. With this, I open it up to the audience this time for a couple of questions directly to Debashish before we move on to Dr. Anybody has a burning question?
I guess it's not so much a question as an observation within what you were saying and what was said earlier, in that you have this kind of parallel movement within the West and with India, where you have these ideals of the West coming to India, and all you can see is the bright lights of it all. And the same thing with the Indian spirituality coming to North America, and only kind of seeing that surface level in the same kind of thing. So it's just kind of this complete misunderstanding from both directions, you know. So I think as somebody myself who has spent a lot of time in North America, I was born in Canada, and I've been to the States many times. And then having just come back from living in India for 10 years, I really feel like this profound sense that there's just, this great misunderstanding of everything that's going on. And I think that it's definitely something that needs to be perpetuated within the academic community, but it's like, how can we find a way to infiltrate, you know, the general population? I still don't really understand how we can do that. Maybe you can comment on that.
This is a little like Bindu's question to Rita, which she deftly bypassed. I wish I could have similar resources to bypass.
You could always live with the questions, as Rita says.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think the best answer I can say is I don't know. I think we are in a transitional period which is very difficult. And, honestly, I mean, there are grassroots movements that can take place, which we have no control over. And they have happened many times in India. There have been reformers. There have been people who have brought wisdom that you could never imagine out of the grassroots. But in today's kind of nationalized condition, where it's no longer the Anthropocene, in a way, is a kind of a global age in which the stamp of the human is on everything. And similarly, the stamp of the national is on everything in nations. And so it's a very different kind of setup than one in which change has been initiated from below. It can happen, but I think we're seeing also a transition of an age where a lot of these things either have to transform themselves through a kind of a greater universalism, movement towards accepting things that they didn't accept before, or they will become ethnocentric. They will become extremely fundamentalist. And so we are seeing both of these happening right now. And that's all I can say.
Anybody else with a question for Debashish, or should we move on? Oh, Clark, did you?
No, there's no question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to be careful not to base everything I'm going to say on facile generalizations. So certainly dogmatism existed in India before the coming to this hemisphere of these traditions. But in your estimation as an Indian, is there something inherent in so again, even to say the Western frame is kind of a cartoon, but the Judeo-Christian sort of lens that we have here. I grew up in South America, and then I moved here. I think I have kind of an inherently Judeo-Christian operating system. Is there something inherent in that kind of way of meeting reality that played into these misunderstandings? Perhaps primarily with the prominence of a theistic, the dualistic theism, which again I know exists in India as well, but the idea of non-duality, for example. Does the Western mind kind of inherently not know what to do with that, and thus leads to these kind of issues?
To some extent, yes. I'd say if we talk about pre-modern India, and I talked about the politics of truth, which is prevalent everywhere, and in India for a very long time, you've had sects that have kind of closed themselves to each other, or created systems that are hegemonic in their own way. But they have also been porous. And there's been a lot of interchange. And the porosity has come from the fact there's somewhere a sense that there are many ways to the same goal. It's a kind of transcendental pluralism. That there is a transcendence where they meet, but it's like the vanishing point of many perspectives. We can't see it. So if I choose this box to live in, that doesn't mean somebody else living in another box is not going somewhere. I have to eradicate that. There isn't the sort of sense that of exclusivism from that point of view. See? So this has been the pre-modern past. That's why, as Deepak said, Hinduism has been largely tolerant in the past. But I think what has happened is that modernity has brought its own frame. And as you said, modernity's frame is a Western frame. And it may have its roots partly in religion, but partly also in modernity as a secular movement, see, as a post-Enlightenment movement, which has sought for a single epistemology, a single absolute epistemology. And that seeking has infected all cultures. That's part of the Anthropocene, actually. So from that point of view, the nationalist frame is a kind of a hegemonic frame that is bought into by these different sects that become more fundamentalist as a result. That's one of the problems of our times.
Thank you, Debashish. In the interest of time, we should be moving on. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Yi-Chin Shu. And Yi-Chin Shu, let me just read a couple of lines from his biography. I'll get into that. So Yi-Chin Shu, also known as Clark, has an MA in Counseling Psychology and Expressive Arts Therapist and is also an adjunct professor here at CIS. As Richard keeps reminding me, he has been instrumental in helping out with the Chinese program that's developing here at CIS. He offers counseling services for individuals, groups, and communities in the Bay Area, Taiwan, and China, and also organizes expressive arts trainings and teaches related classes in these places. Lastly, he actually is from the IT profession, was trying to deepen his own spiritual wisdom tradition, and he holds a position of knowledge consultant for Life Potential International, which offers workshops and publications on the field of mind, body, and spirit for the Chinese audience. So,
hello. I want to first say thank you, Debashish, for inviting me to speak over here, and then thank you everyone for being here. It's very exciting for me to stand over here and to speak about my culture and my tradition and what I believed in, and to just add a little mix into the dialogue. And so I'm really grateful to be here. So how I'm going to share my kind of piece here will be more, I'll be sharing the holistic model that is from my culture, with the Chinese culture, and also from my spiritual practice, which is Tibetan Buddhism. Because as a mental health profession and a mental health worker, as someone who is constantly engaging in this field, I'm always thinking about how we can envision, how we can think about how these ancient traditions can offer our modern day in terms of how we think about wellness, how we think about health, and where can it lead us towards. So today, basically, it's going to be what I'm going to share all about these different frameworks that I have inherited, the different frameworks, the structure, and what I see are the potentials that it can offer us towards the future. So mainly I will be drawing from Chinese model and Tibetan model. So, of course, we all know that the Chinese tradition has a very long history of 5,000 years that go all the way back to 2,000, 3,000, even longer BCE. And then Chinese tradition has been one of the ancient traditions that kind of survived throughout history. The only kind of disruption that happened was during the recent Cultural Revolution. That kind of uprooted some of the Chinese essence, some of the Chinese artifacts and the thoughts that were in a way demolished, destroyed during that period of time. But luckily what happens is that a lot of those are still preserved in Taiwan, in Hong Kong and other areas, and especially because me being in Taiwan. So a lot of the cultures of the 5,000 years, though it has been disrupted, but I've been kind of growing up with it. So the Chinese model is very interesting as I've been growing up with it, because it comes from a very holistic perspective, in a sense that the origin of the Chinese thought that we can trace back is very rooted in three main disciplines. So these three main disciplines we can say is from Taoism, from Confucianism, and from Buddhism. But even though Buddhism is more like an import from India, but it kind of took its rooting since it entered during the Han Dynasty and slowly developed into its own flavor. But Taoism and Confucianism has been the two main pillars of the Chinese thought and belief. Especially, I think, I don't know, are people familiar with I Ching? Those who have heard of I Ching, can you raise your hands? Oh, we have a lot of people. That's good. So I Ching is a global language here. So, a lot of people are asking, of course, where we can trace back the root of I Ching. And then I Ching being the hexagram and really represents and in a way concretizes a lot of the core concepts in the Chinese philosophy, such as the concept of yin and yang and the concept of the elements and all that. And even, I think there's a beautiful story that is behind how the I Ching came about. I'm not sure if people have heard about that. This story, I think, is a good abstraction of the whole animism and the whole framework of the Chinese thought, which is, the story goes with, there's one time there's this person called Fu Xi, who is said to be the author or the originator of the I Ching. And then Fu Xi, one day he was at the river kind of strolling around, and then he saw two creatures. One creature is what we call a long gui, which is a dragon turtle. A dragon turtle, which with the body of a turtle and with the head of a dragon. And then from the dragon turtle, from the shell, there's all kinds of the different formation, the different diagrams. And from that, and the other creature is called a dragon horse. And from the dragon horse, from the body of the horse, there is also a sacred geometrical pattern. So, from those two sources, it is said that it becomes what we call the He Tu and Luo Shu, which is from the shapes and the diagrams of these two creatures. And from this served as the foundation of I Ching, the foundation of a lot of the later on, even the Taoist esoteric runes, sacred diagrams, or sacred practices. So from this itself, I think from the story, it is really a sign where it kind of shows us the interconnectedness of how this whole system works, which is the non-differentiation of the being and the nature and the mythical. So somehow that served as the rooting of how all this thought came to be. For Taoism, there's always this concept of 天人合一, which is the unification of so-called the one with the Tao, the non-separation. So from that perspective itself, it creates a foundation of this framework of looking at one's being not separate from nature. And not separate from nature means not separate from the natural nature and from the spiritual realm. So later on, the I Ching developed and some other kind of schools and kind of techniques developed. Some other sects developed where there's the I Ching and there's the Ba Zi. Ba Zi literally means the 8 character. The 8 character is also another system of understanding the being, another system of really like reading a person's life. So this Ba Zi system is it's just like the astrological sign, but looking at the time, the date, the Ba Zi is separated into 4 categories. Ba means the 8 character. The 8 character represents the 4 pillars. The 4 pillar represents the year pillar, the day pillar, the month pillar, and the hour pillar. So from these 4 pillars, you have the same code that is used in I Ching with the yin and yang, but in addition with 2 other systems of coding, which is called 天干 and 地支. 天干 represents the 10 heavenly signs, and 地支 represents the 12 earthly signs. And then the 天干地支 with a variation of yin and yang, so times 2, times 2. So this serves as another layer of kind of coding, another layer of looking at the being. So from I Ching and from Ba Zi, we can see there is an integration and coding of changing natural phenomena, time, day, natural elements, and then into an understanding of being, or understanding of interaction. Then further on, after the Ba Zi, building on this system, we have what we commonly known, probably most people are very familiar with, is Feng Shui. Feng Shui, which is again entering into the energetic space, like how you arrange different elements, how different things interact with one another, the dynamism of the different objects with one another. So Ba Zi, again, behind it, Feng Shui behind it is the same concept of the same coding of heaven, earth, but this time, there's a new system that may be added into it, depending on the specific Taoist school or sect that we are into, which is the layer of the gods or the spirits. So, of course, there is a historical element also of the progression of these schools and sects and thoughts. But then as the progression, these all elements are being more enriched and coded in different layers. Eventually, it moves into a 4-layer coding, which is a coding of man, we call Ren. And we have a code of Di, which is earth, and a code of heaven, which is just like the astrological signs. And there's the code of the gods. So there's these 4 different planes that are coexisting, co-interacting with one another in terms of our understanding, in terms of our exploration of our being, our life, the space, and then even warfare. So all this system kind of move or integrated into another more modern system, what we call 奇门遁甲, which is utilized for strategy. It's utilized for esoteric practices of the channel of the body, and also utilized as a way of living a life. So from all these kind of systems, I think it offers a holistic perspective for us to look at how we as a being live in this world, and how we understand the psyche, how we understand how we progress. What am I trying to say here? Sorry, I'm a bit nervous over here. My heart is pumping really fast.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Thank you. So, deep breath. Yes. Yeah. Speaking of all this, it's making me alive. I want to move. I'm an expressive arts therapist. It's like it's hard to say in words. I want to move the action. Yeah. I can get you all moving. Later, I can invite everyone. Because one of the pinnacle, I think, of the beauty of this system, especially being an expressive arts therapist or being a therapist, is that in therapy we often think about psyche as psyche. We often separate biology perhaps as biology. But in the Chinese system, especially in the Chinese medicine system, we think we don't have really a separation of the bio and the psyche. In the Chinese system, our emotions reside within the different organs. Our heart perhaps governs our joy, our kidney perhaps governs our sorrow, this and that. So our different parts of our body, of our organ, is responsible for different seats of emotion. So I think this is a very valuable angle to look at, because this would provide us another insight towards how we look at mental health. In a holistic system, just like the Chinese system, our mental wellness is not separate from our environment. How we set up our house is not separate from how we function as a person. How we every day carry ourselves, how our interaction, our relationship with so-called the divine impacts how our relationship and how we deal with our emotions. So the Chinese system offers a multi-dimensional kind of framework to look at in terms of wellness, it's not just as simple as the emotions. There is the layer of the psyche, the emotions, but there is the biological, there is the energetic, there is the supranatural. All of these layers needed to be considered as we think about a person's wellness, as we think about health, either psychological or physiological. Though, of course, there are more and more psychological bridges happening between the somatic and the psyche. But from my perspective, especially my engagement with Taoism and all these practices, is that there is a layer of spirituality that is needed, that needed to be brought in to understand, provide a bigger perspective. And I have actually a real life example that I can share with everyone. Recently I went to China for work and I got really ill. I got all these skin diseases in my body. And then I went back home to Taiwan and tried to do some treatment. I first tried the Eastern method. I took the medicine. It was useful, but it's still getting worse. Some of the inflammations continue to happen. Then I tried the Western medicine. Then the Western medicine helps, but somehow something is still missing. And then my dearest mother, who knows a Taoist priest, invited the priest to come and we create an elaborate ceremony, a Taoist process, or a Taoist kind of sacred ritual, where we created a mandala, a Taoist mandala. We invited the gods to come over. We did the offerings, and we did all the rituals. So engaging in that, somehow the energy moved, all three together. The Western medicine, the Eastern medicine, and this whole ritual, somehow I got better. Okay, sorry.
All of the above.
All of the above. So what I'm trying to say here is that in the ancient times, all these are not separate from the everyday life. Like even today in Taiwan, every block there's a temple. The religious life, the spiritual life is not separate from the mental health. It's not separate from our everyday routine. If we hold this kind of perspective and put it into discussion with the modern day medicine and wellness, what could happen? How do we understand the modern medicine man? Especially if we think about, I haven't been able to bring in the Tibetan Buddhism yet, because in Tibetan Buddhism, briefly just about the Anuttara Yoga practice of Tibetan Buddhism, where it is about transforming the practice into the everyday engagement activity. Our practices is not just on the seat when we recite our mantra, but it encompasses every moment of sitting down, of drinking water, of even having sex, or even sleeping. So if we can bring so-called a mental engagement, not as different departments, if we can think of wellness in terms of growth, not as being separated into departments, but as one holistic system of engagement, which the Eastern system has so much insight about, what would that offer our modern Western thought? What would that offer our, not just Western thought even, so what would that offer our modern man's way of thinking of wellness, of medicine, of health, or what it means to be a medicine man? This is my offering. Thank you.
I was saying you've got 5 minutes more, not to stop.
That's the stuff. Well,
Yes, if you've got any other. Yeah, would you like to?
5 minutes because I heard that people want some movement, so maybe. So maybe for the last 5 minutes, as a way of just embodying a kind of holistic system, or kind of the essence of what I'm trying to say. Maybe I can lead everyone to do a short thing, just come back to our body. So because since as we return to our body, our mind can get more alive, and we can continue this rich conversation. So let me show you everyone just a simple breath, kind of Taoist breath technique that I've learned from this Taoist priest that I talked about. And then this is just a kind of awareness and then opening our senses to the kind of the multi-dimensionality of our reality. So how this works is that first, let me invite everyone to, feel your feet on the ground. And then you can have your feet apart. And then slowly return to your breath. Feel your breath coming in and going out. As you feel your breath, ask your body what it needs right now and just let it go. Just allow first a softening of your body. Then once you are ready, feel once more the breath coming in through your nose and out through your mouth. And bring all your awareness, as if there are threads from the outer world, first back to your internal world. And imagine your consciousness flowing out with your breath, as it enters and it exits. And now let me invite everyone to slowly open your inner ears and eyes. And just allow your consciousness to flow with your breath. See as your consciousness follow your breath and moving within. What is happening? And you invite your breath with your consciousness to go deeper into your body, maybe into your diaphragm. What happens? What do you see? And if you allow it to even travel wider, maybe to your hips, to your legs, to your feet, all the way to the ground. What do you see? And also if you allow it to extend through your shoulders, to your palms, and through your consciousness, open the universe within. Sitting within. And allow Anita to move. Anita to wake. And now, slowly, let me invite everyone to take one more breath with me. Exhale. And maintain this contact with the inner universe, but slowly extend our consciousness back to the external world through opening our eyes if our eyes were closed. And now, without the need to think, allow our body to move into any specific movement or action that it needs right now. Just a way of expansion, and see what happens while we stay with the internal world and the external world. And one more breath all together. Inhale. Exhale. And then look around the space and just make some eye connection with our fellow friends. Give them a smile and thank you.
That was an absolutely beautiful way of sharing your wisdom in an embodied way. I don't know if I can continue my questions. You've shifted me from my usual mental space. But since I actually, as I shared earlier, I had given the panelists some questions to think about. So I think it would only be fair that we start with these questions, and we have was that you already wanted to ask a question? Just hold on, we'll come back, I'll come to you.
No, we come.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Okay.
I was stretching it.
No,
It's not actually a question.
Saurav, for those of you who don't know, is an Orwellian, and we Orwellians are always
Making questions.
asking questions.
Not giving answers, but asking questions.
That's it. Okay, so the first question, and I'm really struggling with this a bit, is that very often when we think of Asia, which is a big, big continent with lots of countries, but very often we collapse it into two countries, as represented by this panel here, well, actually it's from Taiwan or China, and the China and India. Maybe rightly so, because these have been very culturally ancient empires, and also now, of course, frightening emerging economies. So I understand we're talking not of Asia as a geographic entity, but as an Asia for imagination. So my question is this problematic that we actually just think of mostly India and China in today's postmodern world, where we really try to hold differentiation? Let me just do one second, please. Or if you don't agree with my hypothesis, what would your definition of Asia be?
It actually so happens that here we're representing those two.
Exactly, that makes my point.
Well, if there were more people, we could have got some more. West Asia, for example, is also Asia, right? So
Middle East is Asia.
yeah, so we can say that Central Asia is also Asia. Sometimes we think about Chinese and Indian civilizations. So when we talk about Asia as a kind of a continent with relation to, in brackets, the West, which in a way introduced the idea of civilization, because they thought that they were only civilized people, bringing civilization to the rest of the world, which is also what was called the white man's worldview. But a post-colonial world finds that they suddenly woke up to the fact that wherever they went, those people thought that they were the only civilized people as well. The Chinese thought they were the only civilized people. Indians thought so too. And actually, if you really probe these people, they still think so.
Which is the problem of Giovanni.
Right. So, we can talk about civilizations, and when we talk about civilizations, there are major thought systems. And I think Asia has got these two major thought systems with long histories that have many other smaller systems and that have expanded, included. We can also talk about cultures. Cultures within civilizations and outside them. And that's why today we've moved to the discourse of North-South,
Right.
and not only East-West, which is when Haridas Chaudhary came here, he was thinking about the dialogue of civilizations, actually. So from that point of view, it's much more complex. Our understanding today is much more complex. Also, there are modern histories. Modern histories of nations introduce distinct discourses. Japan is a very distinct discourse, for example. And then today, many other nations. So I think the idea of Chinese and Indian civilization is a reality, but it's a simplistic way to understand Asia.
Just give a chance to Clark if you want to add, otherwise to
No, I
Mary.
was going to add to that discussion.
Okay, let's go for it. Can we have a mic for Mary, please? Okay, okay. After Clark, you can.
Yeah, I think I resonate very much with what you said, Debashish. And from a certain perspective, I feel like having everything categorized as Asia, because it is geographical, and also I think it also presents a certain element of because they are geographically close to one another. So there is, as compared to, let's say, the West, this so-called civilizations under Asia has opportunities, historic opportunities of dialoguing with one another. So there is a certain, I think, purpose or value of this bigger category. But that bigger category should not overshadow the individual, the kind of civilization. And I think it's as you said, I think it's a very too simplistic model even to say to have that kind of one country civilization, because different eras, different time. To have, say, Chinese civilization is also a challenging thing, because what about Taiwan? What about Hong Kong? The historical, to have once, it's often I often find it challenging to have a single terminology that defines a certain civilization. Of course, it's for discussion purposes, but I think often the thing is it's always too simplistic. There's always a diversity or a complexity around it.
I think I was going to say something very similar to you, because one of the shocks I had in India was working pretty hard while I lived there to learn Tamil and read Tamil and to cross into another state, and it's not only not the same language, it's not the same script. I mean, I have the same script in Europe anyway, so I at least have some clue. But I think it's an utter illusion to say in any country that it's a single identity. I mean, we're totally fooling ourselves if we say there is a United States. No, there's so many cultures within it. There's so many cultures within India and China, and the spillovers and the movement between. And I think culture is a piece that frequently is left out of the dialogue, and that to me is probably the key piece in learning to interact with each other.
Yes.
And I think I'm just continuing this particular line that all of the panelists and you have advanced. Just the fact that the problematic of diversity really needs to be put right front and center in this whole thing, right? In this whole conversation. And the question of who gets left out of civilization, or who gets left out when you are talking from within a certain discourse. I think that awareness. And it's really interesting because a movie just came out. I don't know how many people in the audience have seen Crazy Rich Asians, because that became a movie that at first was advanced as something that was really bringing in diversity within Hollywood. And then there was a lot of critique of the movie, of the ways in which it doesn't represent certain populations, or it's speaking specifically from a position of privilege even there. So yeah, I think it's so interesting. I think yeah, Asia, but like who's Asia? Why Asia? Therefore Asia? All of those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, just following on what has already been said, what was coming up for me is the question is, do these categorizations still help us? Is it still helpful to think about Asia, to think about, I mean, a classic one is also America, right? When you think about America, you're mostly thinking about North America, you know, but there's Central America, there's South America, there's all of that. And I understand that categorizations can sometimes help to really anchor certain understandings and certain contributions. But I just feel like, you know, again, there's this kind of way of speaking on this increasingly globalized world. And there was always a very globalized world, right? I mean, there was migration has been happening for a really long time. Perhaps it's more intensified now, but even, you know, this issue of the nation state came up before. We were talking about Hinduism and all, you know, kind of Hinduism in America versus Hinduism in India. And so just all these borders, you know, national borders and kind of geographical borders, and I'm just wondering, like, how does it still serve us to think in these kinds of ways?
So, you know, there's a few ways we can look at this. One is complete relativism. That there are umpteen, you know, radical relativism. There are umpteen cultures going down to villages, and every village has its own identity, its own history, its own tropes, its own gods, its own names and lingos and everything. And the other is these big wide kind of categories. So the need for giving names to things is actually a political thing. It comes from the fear of hegemony. The fact that westernization has taken place causes a nation state like India to want to become a nation. Why? Otherwise there would be no need to become a nation. Yeah, it could be a bunch of cultures in conversation. So you find, for example, one of the early movements towards Pan-Asianism occurring when Okakura went to India, and he wrote the book called The Ideals of the East. It begins with Asia is one. And saying Asia is one doesn't make Asia one. But it also does make Asia one, because somebody is saying it for the first time. It isn't that it has a history of being one. These names are constructs, but constructs are also important. They're political. A political construct is actually done in relation to some other political constructs. So from that point of view, both talking about, you know, kind of complete relativism and talking about the construction of identities, whether continental identities, national identities, regional identities are all important.
Yeah, I want just to take from Okakura, you know, that somehow was the first to define Asia as an entity unity, but also to identify the different character of the other civilization, from the Vedic stream to the Chinese stream to the Islamic stream. It was included on that. Interestingly, on the same time in Japan, when Okakura was making an attempt towards One Asia, there was a counter attempt in Japan to escape from Asia. There was a kind of bestseller in Japan at the end of the 18th century. They say Japan wanted to modernize as to go, has nothing to do with this country civilization. And interestingly is this stream that was trying to escape from Asia that went into misunderstood Pan-Asiatism and imperialism. But the other aspect which I wanted to come, I mean, is that it's true that we think of Asia, two-stream civilization, India and China. They always represented big block of humanity. Nothing to do with modern political discourse. not because they are emerging economic power, they are returning economic power. In the 17th century, they were the area of Chinese and Indian civilizations, they represented 25% of GDP of the world. So we are just putting back the clock back to what is the natural things. But what I would like to highlight that we forgot many streams of Asian civilization. That's why I mentioned Central Asia before, for example, because there is now a tendency, also one is to be careful not to go into a kind of local nationalism, but there is now a tendency to reassess all the culture, pre-Buddhistic culture of the Tibetan, Mongolian culture of Central Asia. There is also a tendency to review what is the historical cultural evolution of Southeast Asian culture, which is somehow understood and interpreted as just civilized either by the Chinese or by the Indian and mixed, but something more is there. So Asia is a very complex country. And inside India itself, there are so many kind of culture, different culture, different set of culture, different set of language. That is, we cannot really encompass in one thing. I mean, I found, having been living in India for many years, I found difficult to categorize India as Indian culture. And I believe it's the same for China.
So thank you everybody. I'd like to move on from that. And my next question to the panelists to begin with would be, today, I mean, the world has become a little global village. Cheap airfare, people can go directly to the source of wisdom tradition, as Clark and Richard do, taking students from here to China. And also, I mean, Asian or Indian wisdom traditions also have had a good run of 5 decades, and Hatha Yoga, as this is often quoted, is practiced probably more in USA than in India itself, in whatever diluted form. So the question is, what do we still have to take from these wisdom traditions? I mean, also perhaps keeping in mind, I don't know how much these wisdom traditions themselves are regenerating themselves, the new insights that they have for humanity. Does that make sense? Is there still something new to learn from each other? Or what is still not being assimilated? Anyway, if you get my drift.
I think, I believe in both our talks, that's part of that's what we were trying to address. In a sense, if I got Clark right, what he was saying is that there is a more holistic understanding. And now, of course, we can bring back the notion of the politics of truth and say, what is correct? Which one is correct? But I don't think that's really the central issue. The central issue is that there have been attempts to understand the human in a much larger frame, a frame which includes, the spiritual, the ecological, and the human, the psychological, the cosmological, the psychological, and the spiritual. So from that point of view, a redefinition of the human, because ultimately our age is still a wave of the age of humanism, which started during the Renaissance. And there is a certain model of the human that is assumed in even our everyday understanding of our interactions. So there is a kind of need for transforming that to include a kind of integrated understanding of the human. And I think these wisdom traditions offer us that possibility. That's what I see as the something that they can give. I mean, they're being made to give many other things, like what we said about fitness and this and that. But these, what they are being made to give, are only flavors of a materialistic world. It's only being made subservient to a materialistic world. That's how I understand it. Stress reduction, or fitness, a little bit of peace.
5 to 10 minutes every day.
Don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, for me, thinking about the question, what comes up for me is that I think at every age in time, we're always kind of translating, reinterpreting, re-assimilating different things. Because as different time and age, there are different challenges. Especially given the modern day age with technology, it's a new wave of challenge. For example, if you think about the Heart Sutra, emptiness is form, form is emptiness. 100 years ago, how one would understand, contemplate about that will be different from right now, given all the technology, think about what that means. So, like Debashish said, I feel like our talk is trying to address that thing about how we understand, how we reapproach this wisdom tradition, having its wisdom, but kind of re-entering as if it's like a tower, a wisdom tower that we constantly re-enter and come out, enter and come out, bringing new things. And what is beautiful about the ancient tradition is the holistic framework that it offers. But oftentimes I also find what is beautiful and needed is also not, because there was the question, there's a part of the question that is, now it's so easy to go to a certain source of the tradition. I also think that there is a value now of creating, Debashish and I will talk about, creating a scholarly space in the middle where all these frameworks can be put side to side and we can try to understand them. Because in entering into a certain culture, like we go on a trip, we are kind of in a way washed over by it. Sometimes there is also a certain shroudedness, or it can even be dogmatic sometimes, a deeper kind of engagement. But to create a space where we can retreat and come in, and to be able to examine all these holistic systems, and then see how these holistic systems work with our own system of origin. We all are born from different systems of origin, whether it's holistic, it's Western, it's Eastern, it's Northern. But to have co-create a space so that where all this can come in, to have a dialogue. And I think this is the beauty of the discussion today, or this whole 3 days, is that we co-create a space where different systems can come hand in hand. And then we can talk about the holistic system, or in a way co-create some sort of like a holistic system that resonates with ourselves, or to begin to start this organic inquiry, this organic process of gaining insight from these ancient traditions, and then learn and utilizing modern systems to see how that best fit us to create our organic holistic system. So I think this is, for this to happen, the East, or whether we call it the East, the Asia, this systems, a space for it needs to come in. And also not to also put bar against the other systems, we so-called the Western system, the sciences and all that, but have all of them coming into the space of dialogue. So I think this is the beauty.
I also want to add, and this is something that's that I feel so strongly about, because I have seen some of the worst excesses of tradition in India, and not just when they emerge out of a fundamentalist nationalistic context, but from the context of orthodoxy. And so for me, like this whole thing of wisdom tradition also, and I think all three of you spoke to it a little bit, like what are the practices, what are the self-reflexive practices that the tradition is able to continually bring in, and therefore have some sort of a renewal, because in some ways, in some way or the other, many of these wisdom traditions have had some kind of oppression encoded in them. There have always been hierarchies that have been structured, which have left out either women, or, and I think speaking only to India, or the lower castes of the Dalits. So then, to see them as intact and holistic without also bringing in these other questions would not serve us right now. And I think that's something we can do, especially when we're talking about being scholar practitioners, because we have access to other ways of thinking and other ways of questioning right now.
This is partly what I was trying to address in my talk, that in the assimilation of the Enlightenment, there are certain values that have kind of liberated us. It's not just all bad, you know. For example, the base that human beings are all equal, which many times we don't think of. Of course, the other problem comes in, which is the problem of the West, which is the question of who gets labeled human.
Get to claim equality.
Right. But nevertheless, I think internalizing that liberates us from these pasts of oppression, which do exist. I mean, it cannot be sort of minimized or romanticized.
Okay, I was going to skip this one, but given where the conversation is going, the activist in me has got one more difficult question in terms of the oppression of women that we're speaking to. Asia, unfortunately, has got some of the worst women rights abuses in the entire world. And yet what the world needs today is actually a paradigm shift towards more feminine principles of nurturing, caring, connection, because I think that's the only thing that will save the world. So again the question, what does Asia have to teach us about the feminine? And also, if you like, you could take it, I would fully agree that maybe there's a different definition of the feminine than the Western definition of feminine. So any thoughts around that? I'm sorry, the question is perhaps not very clear, but...
Yeah, I think it's a very complex question, Bindu, because again it comes to easy reifications. You know, one can give an answer, in terms of stereotypes that seem to be true, which is what was happening to some extent today also.
Yes.
So there are many different models or images of the feminine, and there are empowering images of the feminine, and there is the fact of the oppression of the female. Yeah. So the point is, in constructing the future, we have to look to the choices that we have to make. We can't just accept the past as the past. We can't accept tradition as something that is fixed. But we can construct the future with positive images, and we have to actually filter out or reclaim the voices that have been suppressed.
And when you asked the question, I was just thinking of in Chinese different thoughts. There are different groups in China that are, though of course it's more the minority, but it's more matriarchal. So it's feminine centered. So I agree with her. She's a difficult question to answer. It's very complex. And I think there is a rich dimensionality of looking at how women are being treated in Asia or in specific culture, and even in different subcultures might be very different. And I think ultimately, I think it comes to again understanding, and then how we really look into the empowerment of the future. And I think, I don't really have a clear answer. Yeah, but it's just, I just feel drawn to just saying that there's a rich diversity that we need to explore, even within these big cultures, to be able to start to begin to ask this question further.
While driving over here just this afternoon, we listened to the news, and It appears that the Indian Supreme Court has just made men and women in India on equal footing in terms of adultery. And
Adultery.
that on the, right on the tail of gay rights being made, there was a point made in the conversation that there's a Supreme Court justice that's retiring and he wants to change lots of things like this before he leaves.
Thank you, Jack. Did you have something to follow up, Mary?
Yeah, we were also hearing a lot about the current Supreme Court discussion, and I just in this current question, I thought, could we be asking this or looking at from a point of view of what scares men about women? Because that's got to be what it comes down to. As someone who grew up in a very Christian household, there were no goddesses in my Protestant experience. And to come to India and see this rich goddess tradition. And I know that's true in so many traditions. So historically, that honoring has been there, and it has sort of been there in the Catholic tradition. That's the only Christian part of it. But just, I don't have an answer, but just to throw it out, what is so scary about women?
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments on the last few questions and comments. Another sad fact, Jack, is, and I hope the Supreme Court ruling about this, India is one of the few countries where marital rape is still allowed. That's considered, as part of that. So, and maybe that's an excellent question, because I think to broaden it, many religions have actively persecuted the feminine. You think about the Catholic Church, the burning of the witches, and so on. And even as we continue this, and one more thing that I always like to say, Christianity had only one form of worshipping the feminine divine, the Virgin, and that was very restricting for me. India has got all these multiple forms, the goddesses, Kanyakumari, the Virgin, the Mother, the Lover, and so that's very uplifting. And I guess Debashish, yes, I was generalizing and trying, but I think what is pointing to was that I think in a globalized world, we can no longer think of Asia as having the hegemony over wisdom. And I want Asia to look at its own shadows in what it does. So that's where it's coming from. We have 5 more minutes on this panel, and I would like to open it for any other questions or comments from the audience. Otherwise, I'll continue with my activist questions. Anybody?
Just a quick question. It's very quick.
I got you.
You mentioned the importance of the holistic understanding, and you explained a lot about
the mic, please.
The understanding of duality on many levels, and all of it that is very complex for our Western eyes. But most of us, we were very familiar with it, using it. I use the Taoist version of that, so I'm interested in, you recommend a book about the other one that says Batsu or something?
Yeah.
Just understand a little more the layers of what you were saying.
Resources. Unfortunately, all my books are in Chinese, so I have to look for the English version. There are, because especially one of the systems that I talked about, which is the Qimen Dunjia, is one of the most complicated systems where it integrates the elements of I Ching into Bazi and everything into it. And it has been so-called, what we call the craft of the emperor in the past, where the emperors would learn this and then how to manage a whole state. and how to even, not just in terms of management, but also in terms of magical, supernatural functions of calling it, because in this system the 4 layers are summoned. So to learn more about it, maybe I don't know how I can share resources. Yeah, we can share it to you. Yeah, because it's a interesting complex system.
And I'm just linking it to the topic of today, like 1968.
And this would be the last question.
1968, like there was a complete revolution which happened, and we say that it has forked the, the pre-1968, post-1968. Is there something similar in Eastern traditions, like there was some year or some incidences, like the world has changed after?
Great question. There's a book called 1,000 Mutinies. I think
15th August 1872.
Some 96 years before, yes. 15th August.
It's the birthday of sugar.
Very good.
if I understand where you're coming from, also actually I would like to even deconstruct, because I think even the idea of a revolution is very much a Western lens we're looking at. And also, unfortunately, because of Western imperialism, the multiple revolutions in India, at least some that have happened or that must have happened in Asia, often don't get the publicity that it does in the West. One of them is the Naxalite movement, which has been an ongoing battle in India. Okay, but how about, sorry, Clark, you wanted to speak to it, sorry.
Because when you ask the question, I talk of the critical moment. So critical moment is a shifting point. And I think about China now, especially with my work with China this couple of years. I feel like the time is now. Actually, what's happening in China for the past 3-5 years, we put aside the industrial, but in terms of the, I think it's a renaissance for China right now. Because awakening from the Cultural Revolution and now reclaiming its own ancient culture, but while at the same time very thirsty for a lot of the wisdom, a lot of the knowledge from outside of China. All things are kind of clashing. So now in China, it's interesting is that everywhere there are workshops, everywhere there are talks, people attend talks, people attend workshops. So it's a time of rapid changing. So if there's a moment, and maybe it's now, but of course, it's in the process. And what I think is a beautiful gift is that though it's China that's going through it, but because of the modernization, because of technology, I think it's not just China. China is kind of course, geographically, that people there is going through. But because the people there is going through, it's bringing the rippling effect. Good example would be how the change in China is bringing some changes here inside CIS. Because of the need in China, CIS is responding and also bringing new dialogue into it. So all these dialogues are happening. It's like an epicenter that kind of moves things. So if there's a time right now, I think maybe it is now.
Sorry, the Naxalite movement was 1968, so that's why I brought it up. How about a short meditative silence, and we'll close for this session.